This is Land of Havilah, Mark 15b. Pilate ordered Jesus to be flogged, then sent him for crucifixion. Coming up, the Praetorium is the governor's residence and administrative building where Jesus appeared before Pilate, John 18:28, and a Roman cohort is the 10th part of a legion, about 480 soldiers. Verse 16, the soldiers led him away within the court, which is the Praetorium, and they called together the whole cohort. They clothed him with purple, and weaving a crown of thorns, they put it on him. They began to salute him, "Hail, King of the Jews!" They struck his head with a reed and spat on him, and bowing their knees did homage to him. When they had mocked him, they took the purple off him and put his own garments on him. They led him out to crucify him. Comment in verse 16, they called the whole cohort together to mock him. It's another testament to Jesus' name recognition that the Roman soldiers knew who he was. In Jesus' condemnation by Pilate and in the mocking by the soldiers, there was plenty of guilt for Gentiles. When Gentiles call Jews Christ killers, there's plenty of blame to go around. During Jesus' sufferings, what was his demeanor? Isaiah prophesied, quote, "I gave my back to those who beat me, and my cheeks to those who plucked off the hair. I didn't hide my face from shame and spitting, for the Lord Yahweh will help me. Therefore I've not been confounded. Therefore I've set my face like a flint, and I know that I shall not be disappointed." Isaiah 50:6 and 7. His demeanor was that he set his face like a flint, like a stone. Jesus, quote, when he was cursed, didn't curse back. When he suffered, didn't threaten, but committed himself to him who judges righteously. 1 Peter 2:23. The mocking dishonored Jesus by all appearances, but what's sown in dishonor is raised in glory, and sown in weakness raised in power. 1 Corinthians 15:43. Apparently the beating was so severe and weakened him so badly, verse 21. They compelled one passing by, coming from the country, Simon of Cyrene, the father of Alexander and Rufus, to go with them, that he might bear his cross. Comment, ordinarily the condemned man carried his own cross, Luke 14:27, but either Jesus was too weak from the flogging, or to make a better show of him, they made him walk without it, so the cross wouldn't shield his face. Jesus walked in front, and Simon of Cyrene walked behind with the cross, Luke 23:26. Verse 22, they brought him to the place called Golgotha, which is, being interpreted, the place of a skull. They offered him wine mixed with myrrh to drink, but he didn't take it. Crucifying him, they parted his garments among them, casting lots on them, what each should take. It was the 3rd hour, and they crucified him. Comment, in verse 22, they led him to a place outside the city wall, Hebrews 13:12, known as Golgotha in the local language, which means place of a skull. We also call it Calvary, which comes from Latin for skull. It's speculated the place got its name from a rock formation that looked like a skull. In verse 23, before they crucified him, they offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he wouldn't take it. He said he wouldn't drink the fruit of the vine until he drank it anew with us in his Father's kingdom, Matthew 26:29. In verse 24, the soldiers cast lots for his clothing. In verse 25, they crucified him. In verse 26, the superscription of his accusation was written over him, the King of the Jews. With him they crucified 2 robbers, one on his right hand and one on his left. The scripture was fulfilled, which says, he was counted with the transgressors. Comment, that was Isaiah 53:12. He was counted with the transgressors not just because he was between 2 criminals. In a larger sense, the public, for the most part, stopped believing in him, hearing that he died on the cross. If he was the Messiah, the cross couldn't have happened, they figured. He must have been a false prophet. So instead of believing in him, they counted him with the transgressors. Verse 29. Those who passed by blasphemed him, wagging their heads and saying, "Ha! You who destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself and come down from the cross." Comment, to get it straight, it was they who were destroying the temple of his body, but it would be he who would rebuild it in 3 days. And he could have easily saved himself, but he refused. He could have come down from the cross, but he wouldn't. And though he wouldn't save himself, he would save many others, just for the record. Verse 31. Likewise, also the chief priests, mocking among themselves with the scribes, said, He saved others, he can't save himself. Let the Christ, the King of Israel, now come down from the cross, that we may see and believe him. Those who were crucified with him also insulted him. Comment, he told them before he would show them no sign but the sign of Jonah, Matthew 12:39, which was not that he would come down from the cross, but that he would die and be raised on the third day. Verse 33. When the 6th hour had come, there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour. At the 9th hour Jesus cried with a loud voice, saying, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which is, being interpreted, my God, why have you forsaken me? Comment, they crucified him at 9 a.m. in verse 25. He was still alive at 3 p.m. in verse 34, which makes 6 hours. In verse 33, the second half of that period was dark from noon to 3. But why did he quote Psalm 22, which says, my God, why have you forsaken me? Jesus was carrying the sins of the world on him, therefore there was separation between him and the Father, for the only time ever. The Father forsook him in that moment. It was no miracle that Jesus was able to quote a psalm on the cross, but how was it possible for the rest of the psalm to be fulfilled? Quote, All those who see me mock me. They insult me with their lips. They shake their heads, saying, He trusts in Yahweh. Let him deliver him. Let him rescue him, since he delights in him. Comment, those were the exact words they taunted Jesus with in verses 31 and 32. Going on with the psalm, quote, There's no one to help. Many bulls have surrounded me. Strong bulls of Bashan have encircled me. They open their mouths wide against me. Lions tearing prey and roaring. I'm poured out like water. All my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax. It's melted within me. My strength is dried up like a potsherd. My tongue sticks to the roof of my mouth. You brought me into the dust of death, for dogs have surrounded me. A company of evildoers have enclosed me. They pierced my hands and feet. I can count all of my bones. They look and stare at me. They divide my garments among them. They cast lots for my clothing. But don't be far off, Yahweh. You're my help. Hurry to help me. End quote. Coming up, when Jesus said, Eloi, Eloi, which is my God, his mouth was dry, his voice was weak, and his pronunciation was poor. Therefore, some of them standing there misunderstood him. They thought he was saying, Elijah, Elijah, calling on the Old Testament prophet Elijah. Then they thought, this will be interesting. Let's see if Elijah will come down and save him. Verse 35. Some of those who stood by, when they heard it, said, Behold, he's calling Elijah. One ran, and filling a sponge full of vinegar, put it on a reed, and gave it to him to drink, saying, Let him be. Let's see whether Elijah comes to take him down. Comment, someone gave him vinegar on a sponge, maybe to wet his mouth and hear him better, and said, Let him be, meaning stop mocking him. The idea was that if Elijah came down, it would vindicate him, so better wait and see before we mock. Verse 37. Jesus cried out with a loud voice and gave up the spirit. The veil of the temple was torn in two from the top to the bottom. Comment, the veil divided the temple into two large rooms. One was the holy place where the priests ministered daily, Leviticus 24:3, and beyond the veil was the most holy place, inhabited by the Spirit of God, Exodus 25:22. No one usually set foot there except the high priest once a year, Hebrews 9:7. So the veil separated man and God. In verse 38 that we just read, just after Jesus gave up his spirit, God tore the veil of the temple from top to bottom. With the destruction of Jesus' flesh, there was destruction of the veil, so that through Christ men could enter the presence of God. Hebrews 10:19-23. Verse 39. When the centurion who stood by opposite him saw that he cried out like this and breathed his last, he said, Truly this man was the Son of God. Comment, the military officer in charge noticed the whole thing was getting spookier by the moment. To begin with, this was supposedly a holy man, But then it got dark in the middle of the day. In verse 39, he heard what Jesus cried out in a loud voice just before he breathed his last, which was, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit," Luke 23:46. When Jesus died, there was an earthquake, Matthew 27:51. By then the officer had seen enough. He drew the natural conclusion that since Jesus called God his Father, he truly was the Son of God. Verse 40. There were also women watching from afar, among whom were both Mary Magdalene and Mary the mother of James the Less and of Joses, and Salome, who, when he was in Galilee, followed him and served him, and many other women who came up with him to Jerusalem. Comment: Jesus' mother and the Apostle John were close enough to the cross that Jesus could speak to them, John 19:26. There's no accounting of any of the other male disciples being at the cross, but in verses 40 and 41, many women who had followed him from Galilee and served him were watching from afar. Verse 42. When evening had now come, because it was the preparation day, that is, the day before the Sabbath, Joseph of Arimathea, a prominent council member who also himself was looking for God's kingdom, came. He boldly went in to Pilate and asked for Jesus' body. Pilate marveled if he were already dead, and summoning the centurion, he asked him whether he had been dead long. When he found out from the centurion, he granted the body to Joseph. He bought a linen cloth, and taking him down, wound him in the linen cloth, and laid him in a tomb which had been cut out of rock. He rolled a stone against the door of the tomb. Mary Magdalene and Mary the mother of Joses saw where he was laid. Comment: in verse 42, the crucifixion took place on a Friday, no room for doubt, because, quote, it was the preparation day, that is, the day before the Sabbath, end quote. In verses 43 to 46, Joseph of Arimathea was a hero. He stepped up at the lowest point in human history. He was a prominent council member, but full of faith, quote, looking for God's kingdom, in verse 43. We don't know if he was present at the trial or whether he was vocal, but at least, quote, he had not consented to their counsel and deed, Luke 23:51. He, quote, boldly went in to Pilate and asked for Jesus' body, in verse 43. Since burial was a job for more than one person and Joseph was rich, Matthew 27:57, he likely recruited servants to help him. He wrapped the body in linen in the traditional way, transported it to his own new tomb, which was cut from rock, and rolled a great stone over the entrance, Luke 19:40 and Matthew 27:60. As Isaiah 53:9 prophesied, Jesus was, quote, with a rich man in his death, end quote. Nicodemus from John chapter 3 also stepped up and brought 75 pounds of spices for preparing the body, John 19:39. He was a ruler of the Jews, John 3:1, which means he was probably also a member of the council, so both had considerable standing and reputation, which they forfeited to do what they did. Surely the saying applies to them, quote, the wise will shine like the brightness of the heavenly expanse, Daniel 12:3. Mark 16 is next at landofhavilah.net, Mark 16.